So let's talk about security with cross-chain bridges. So to date, we've seen over $2.5 billion hacked from cross-chain bridges, and $1.3 billion of that has come this year alone. There's been $4 billion in monthly bridge volume, so it's clear that users still want to bridge assets cross-chain, but security needs to be considered in terms of keeping users safe when using these cross-chain bridges. With Chainlink Proof of Reserve, we leverage Chainlink decentralized Oracle network that secures tens of billions in DeFi to verify assets collateralization. These can be assets that are off-chain collateralized, like tokenized stablecoins, tokenized commodities like gold, but also cross-chain collateralized, like wrapped assets, where the native asset is locked up on the source chain and a minted version, a synthetic wrap version, is minted on the destination chain. This diagram illustrates how the Chainlink node network monitors and reports the proof of reserve values into the proof of reserve contract on chain. So here, anytime the asset vault changes in value, the nodes observe that change, sign their observations, create a report, and deliver that onto the destination chain. Who does proof of reserve support? Well, we really think about three categories. There's the token issuer. This could be the bridge or a centralized issuer for the token. They can show transparently that what they've minted corresponds to the amount they have locked up in reserve. The other party is DeFi apps and developers. So for a lot of multi-pool protocols, one asset getting exploited has the potential to affect all users on the platform. So by leveraging a proof of reserve feed, they can verify before they accept assets to deposit that that asset is fully backed at all times. The last, of course, is for the token holder themselves. If you hold one of these bridged or wrapped assets, you can also leverage proof of reserve to verify that the asset you hold is fully collateralized and backed one-to-one. We've seen a lot of events over the last few months with institutions and entities not adhering to the standards for transparency and security that Web3 natively offers. So we're encouraging more individuals and developers to leverage proof of reserve to reduce insolvency risks, increase transparencies for all parties involved, prevent systemic failures, and then boost community trust. Now, we're very fortunate to be joined by two members from the Ava Labs team, and we'll talk about proof of reserve and their implementation with BTC.b. All right, hello and welcome to another Chainlink Tech Talk. Today, we're very lucky to have a few members from the Ava Labs team, and we're going to be talking about proof of reserve and bridging assets. So we have Michelle and Matt from Ava Labs. I'd like you guys to go ahead and introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about you, maybe how you got into crypto, and what you're working on for Ava Labs.
Yeah, sure. So, you're gonna go first, Michelle? You got
it. You got it.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, so my name is Matt Schmenk. I'm part of the business development team at Ava Labs, specifically focused on DeFi and institutions, but also lead our data-related efforts and really help with infrastructure and most apps within our ecosystem. So kind of a generalist at this point in time, but been here for around a little over 10 months now. It's kind of flown by. There's been a lot of interesting events since joining Ava Labs full time, but started off in traditional finance for about a year and a half directly at an undergrad, and I'm on level 3 of the CFA. I actually started in undergrad in CSE, so I have a little bit of programming experience as well, and I've taken a few Solidity courses, just trying to familiarize myself with smart contracts. So it's a little bit about myself.
And hey, everyone, I'm Michelle, super excited to be here. I'm a product manager here at Ava Labs. My focus is on the bridge, the Avalanche bridge, which we'll dive into a little bit more today, as well as just general interoperability. And I also have a similar path to Matt. So I started out in TradFi as well. I was in investment banking for a couple years, and then I really wanted to get into tech and product. So then I moved over to a crypto ETF startup. And then now I'm really deep down in the rabbit hole at Ava Labs. So excited to be here.
Great. Well, we're lucky to have you both today. I want to center this discussion around the Avalanche bridge, but more specifically, BTC.b, which is the wrapped version of Bitcoin on Avalanche. It has grown tremendously over the last few months. I want to rewind a bit because the Avalanche bridge really came into service in early 2021. And earlier this year, you guys launched Bitcoin to Avalanche. And so my first question is, why Bitcoin? There's a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of Bitcoin advocates out there. But after Ethereum, what made Bitcoin the logical next step for bridging assets?
Yeah, I'm happy to start there. Why Bitcoin? Well, there's so much TVL and there's so much interest and demand in Bitcoin. You know, Bitcoin was really the first cryptocurrency asset out there. So there's all these Bitcoin maxis out there, but there's not that much you can do with Bitcoin within the Bitcoin network itself, which is why it makes sense to kind of wrap it into WBTC. And that's kind of what the primary way that people have been using Bitcoin has been so far. That is until we have BTC.b, which is essentially our representation of Bitcoin on the Avalanche C chain. So it is really just native Bitcoin that has been bridged over from the Bitcoin blockchain network onto the Avalanche C chain, and it's represented as an ERC20 asset. So I think there's so much that you could do with Bitcoin within the Avalanche ecosystem. You know, there's so many different protocols and projects that you can participate. Whereas over on the Bitcoin blockchain network itself, you know, you can really just only hold it. So I would say that's kind of what I would say. And then Matt, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, to echo Michelle, I think it's kind of thought of as one of the purest forms of cryptocurrency. Truly, when it was founded in 2008, Satoshi's vision during the financial crisis. And from then on out, it kind of led to maximalism, of course, and it's now considered probably one of the hardest assets in really the whole universe, considering you can mine most kind of precious materials in outer space these days here in probably the next like 50 years. So gold and precious metals might become less and less scarce versus Bitcoin might become more and more scarce over time. So really bringing it on chain in a non-custodial manner in which Bitcoin maximalists or even just kind of hobbyists could really take control of their assets on a chain that's not the Bitcoin blockchain, and really have the better technology that Avalanche brings, sub-second finality, Avalanche consensus, and kind of our robust DeFi ecosystem, and being able to use your Bitcoin as collateral, getting it kind of using it for yield generation and kind of other ways within our ecosystem just made a ton of sense. So.
Yeah, Matt and Michelle, you both touched on interesting points. For some of us, Bitcoin was the first introduction to cryptocurrency. And if we look at the limitations of the Bitcoin blockchain today, you know, you have 10-minute block times essentially. Now we're porting Bitcoin, or you're porting Bitcoin over to a blockchain where you have as you said, sub-second finality. You know, it's kind of interesting to see this full circle. But for some people, the whole bridging concept is a little bit opaque. And so I was hoping specifically around Avalanche's implementation of a bridge, you could walk us through this diagram we'll see on screen and explain the bridge architecture, maybe in a more of a layman's terms, so someone who is not familiar could pick it up more easily.
Sure. I think the first thing to really talk about with the Avalanche bridge is it has a very unique architecture. So there is at that center of the diagram, you see this Intel SGX application. So what is that, right? Like that sounds like a whole mouthful. So what it really is, it's just Intel's hardware technology that enables us to have trusted execution environments. So it's really taking away, you know, centralization and having it more decentralized with this warden system as well, because we have 8 bridge nodes, or formerly known as wardens. So we have 8 wardens right now: Anchor, Halborn, Avascan, Beware, Blockdaemon, Chainstack, Protofire, and Ava Labs ourselves. And the trust model is 6 of 8. So essentially at least 6 of the bridge nodes have to agree on any transaction. And then the enclave will essentially call the smart contract to execute the minting or burning of tokens. So that's essentially the architecture. You have this enclave, trusted execution, and then you have these 8 individual parties that essentially agree on any type of transaction. And taking a step maybe back further, what exactly is a bridge? You know, why is it so important? I think that's also important for users just to get an understanding. So token bridges are really just a way to allow tokens or assets to migrate from one chain to another. As we mentioned earlier, BTC.b is really great because with Bitcoin itself on the Bitcoin blockchain, there's not really much you can do given the limitations of Bitcoin network itself. So having that Bitcoin as a representation on the Avalanche network allows you to participate in many more DeFi activities and to engage in different protocols and projects on the Avalanche ecosystem.
That makes sense. And this bridge structure is very similar to the Ethereum to Avalanche bridge using the same Intel SGX technology. But Bitcoin itself comes with a lot of nuances. And Michael Kaplan from your team wrote a great blog, which we'll link and reference, that goes really into some technical detail. But could you maybe highlight a few of the nuances in working with the Bitcoin network to bridge assets to Avalanche?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that UTXOs are really one of the big challenges for Bitcoin, right? It's very different from Ethereum itself. And so how we handle UTXOs and just the differences and nuances between Bitcoin versus Ethereum is really big. And we do a lot of that handling within the bridge itself, but as well as the core wallet. So right now, if you were to use the Avalanche bridge to bridge over BTC to BTC.b, you would use the core wallet itself, which does a really good job of basically translating in your BTC.b into one single address on the Avalanche C chain as the destination address. So instead of having all of your, different tokens or different BTC.b sent to a bunch of different addresses on the C chain, we consolidate that into one single address.
Makes sense from a high level. I'm sure there's a lot of technical and deep thought that went into this, but for users, one of the most important things is security on top of the technical difficulties of bridging an asset like this. As we mentioned earlier, we've seen over $1 billion this year alone in bridge exploits. Not a way that users want to lose money. Can you maybe highlight what security efforts have gone into making this as safe as possible for users to bridge Bitcoin over, and what you do to continually monitor that security?
Yeah, there's a ton of different security measures that we take. I could probably talk about this for days. But I guess taking a step back first, the thing that you mentioned was just the sheer magnitude of bridge hacks. So I think there's been over $2.5 billion worth of bridge hacks year to date, which is an insane amount. And why is that, right? Why are bridges so attractive? Well, there's kind of two main ways that you could exploit a bridge. One is on the origin network, where the exploiter could essentially try to steal funds from the deposit contract, since there's so many of the native tokens locked up. Then you have the destination network, where the hacker could essentially create an infinite minting attack, which is essentially just to create as much as possible of the wrapped tokens that is greater than the amount that is locked up on the origin side. So there's, a couple different main ways that bridges have been exploited this year. And I think the two major ones have been smart contract exploits, as well as classic phishing attacks. And I think it's really important to touch about how the Avalanche bridge differs from other bridges within the context of these two items. So the first is that the Avalanche bridge really has limited use of smart contracts. So there's no smart contracts on the Ethereum side. Instead, we use EOAs, which are externally owned accounts. These are just addressees without smart contracts. On the Avalanche side, we do have some smart contracts, but they are very low in complexity and they are not upgradable. So if you compare the Avalanche bridge, which is very limited in smart contract use, versus the other bridges, which have prolific reliance on smart contracts, the Avalanche bridge is safer in that regard. And then the other main attack vector has been classic phishing attacks. This is really just the infection of servers, systems, developer computers, and so forth. And unlike smart contracts, which I just mentioned, the risk is relatively low for the Avalanche bridge because of the limited use, any company is really susceptible to phishing attacks, right? There are, however, I would say a few distinctions and mitigants for why the Avalanche bridge is a bit stronger. The first is that hacking Ava Labs servers is not enough. Again, I mentioned earlier briefly that the Avalanche bridge is built on SGX technology. So this sort of SGX technology is really just this hardware that runs code in encrypted and isolated memory, and it protects us from most of these types of hacks. And the second item is that the trust model is 6 of 8, which I also mentioned earlier. But essentially what that means is that in order for a hacker to exploit and successfully compromise the Avalanche bridge, then at least 6 of these bridge nodes or wardens need to be compromised. And I really want to emphasize the 6 of 8 trust model, because one of the other bridges that we saw this year that got hacked was a 5 of 9, but the 5 was not truly a 5. The hacker only needed to compromise one single party in order to gain access to 5 of the nodes. So I think that distinction is really important for Avalanche Bridge, because the 8 bridge nodes are truly run by experienced, established, separate blockchain companies, and they are completely different nodes set up in completely different geographic locations, operated by different teams, and there's no RPC connection or communication with one another. So I think these are kind of the key differentiators for the Avalanche Bridge. And then obviously, Proof of Reserve is a really exciting addition that we have. And it's essentially a way for users, protocols, and other projects to verify the collateral of the bridge. So what Proof of Reserve does is it displays the amount of, for example, if we're looking at BTC.b, it displays the amount of Bitcoin that is held in the bridge as collateral. So it's really just a way as an independent third party for users to verify that the Avalanche Bridge is sufficiently collateralized. And this sort of transparency and visibility, I think, is really important and will help users alleviate some of these concerns about, the crazy exploits we've seen this year.
That was a great answer, and also a great transition to Proof of Reserve. So Chainlink and Avalanche and the Ava Labs team have a long history of working together, from price oracles to randomness to automation. And Proof of Reserve is just a continuation of that relationship. You touched on, Michelle, a little bit the importance of this, and we've seen now Ava has introduced a proposal to actually leverage Proof of Reserve to further protect their users. For Matt or Michelle, curious, why is this transparency so important? Why are you saying, hey, we trust our bridge, but also here's a third party that's independently verifying what we say we have?
Yeah, so I think this is super important, especially in terms of DeFi applications in which you're using bridged asset as collateral. And so generally, if you can kind of detect an exploit happening in real time, or if something isn't properly collateralized like a bridge, you might be able to have a circuit breaker or halt the bridge, and so assets cannot directly flee from one side to another. Or if there's still proper levels of liquidity for those bridged assets, the protocol can actually liquidate in real time, kind of ensuring there's a minimum amount of bad debt within the protocol as possible. So I think it'll continue to really ensure DeFi applications are safe, secure, and kind of accrue the least amount of bad debt as possible.
That's great. I want to jump a little bit, because I know a lot of people are familiar with WBTC, and that's probably one of the first wrapped Bitcoins, but 2019 is when it came out, ERC20 on Ethereum. Michelle, maybe you could talk to us a bit about the differences between WBTC, which I see is also bridged onto Avalanche through the Ethereum bridge, and BTC.b, and their differences and how they operate.
Yeah, sure. I'll give a high level differences, and then Matt, definitely feel free to jump in. I know you're an expert on some of the cost structure differences as well. So I would say there's 3 main differences that immediately kind of pop into my head. It is centralization, cost, and access. So the first one is WBTC. Like you said, this is really just wrapped Bitcoin, but it's on the Ethereum network. But WBTC, or wrapped Bitcoin, is centralized, because in order to mint wrapped Bitcoin, you need to submit a request to a WBTC merchant. And then this merchant goes to a custodian, exchanges that BTC for WBTC, and then the custodian will lock that BTC in a reserve and hold it as in custody. Whereas if you compare that to BTC.b, which is native Bitcoin represented on the Avalanche C chain, you don't need to go to a merchant or have a custodian hold your BTC.b. You are your own custodian. You basically can just use our core wallet extension at any point and get BTC.b, as long as you have the Bitcoin itself as collateral to deposit into the bridge. So that's great, but I think another really interesting thing is that this becomes actually a big issue for WBTC when users try to redeem it. That is because only merchants are able to request the locked up BTC held by a custodian. So in times of volatile markets, redemptions typically won't occur on demand, and then depegging can occur. If you compare this to BTC.b, if you want to start taking out your BTC.b and exchanging it for Bitcoin, you can do this within the core wallet extension at any time. So definitely when compared to WBTC, BTC.b is less centralized. The other thing is cost. So Matt, feel free, obviously, to talk more about this, but I would say generally BTC.b is a lot cheaper. And that is because right now the Avalanche bridge only charges you a flat fee of $3, no matter what your transaction size is, in order to get BTC.b. Whereas for WBTC, there's, I think, 2 fees here because of the merchant custodian structure. And usually this is a basis point percentage model. So if you have a larger transaction size amount that you're trying to process, then you're going to get charged more. And then the last thing quickly I'll just touch upon is access. So in order to obtain WBTC, you need to go through KYC AML, whereas anyone can just go over to our core wallet and obtain BTC.b. So you don't have to go through that whole process. So yeah, I would say those are the 3 main things that jump out.
Yeah, Michelle stole most of my thunder, but 2 major points that I would like to touch upon. Like Michelle said, during times of high volatility, Wrapped Bitcoin is not as easily accessible in terms of redemption for actual as something like BTC.b. And so the most recent example of this was during the long Thanksgiving weekend. No one actually could redeem wrapped Bitcoin for actual Bitcoin, and it essentially started to depeg, which it's super interesting to think about because these are kind of the financial systems that we're trying to go away from in terms of blockchain and Web3, going away from like T+2 settlement, going away from not being able to do stuff on weekends or long holiday weekends or during the holidays. And so BTC.b allows for people to redeem no matter what day it is, the time of the day, et cetera, for actual, and really ensure that the ARBs on chain continue to be basically 1-to-1 pricing of Bitcoin in terms of native Bitcoin, but also in terms of BTC.b. So like Michelle touched upon, in terms of costs as well, generally wrapped Bitcoin charges between 25 and 50 bips because there's 2 separate fees. Both a custodian fee and a merchant fee. And in terms of kind of moving large volumes of native Bitcoin on chain, it makes quite a bit more financial sense to use the Bitcoin bridge that we kind of created here at Ava Labs compared to something like a wrapped Bitcoin.
Makes sense. I think it's neat for the end user. As an end user, I can have Bitcoin and move it on and pull it off as I want. So I think that's really one of the cool parts about what's been done here at BTC.b. I know we have limited time, and I want to look forward a little bit. When we're talking with protocols or developers who are building on Avalanche, we frequently hear about subnets. Subnets keep coming up more and more. So 2 questions to kind of close out this talk. First is BTC.b on subnets. Will we see BTC.b moving between subnets? Is that available today? Is it in the roadmap? And then second, we've seen Ethereum bridged assets and now we've seen Bitcoin bridged assets. An individual would likely ask, is there more? Will there be more assets that are bridged natively from one chain to the other? To the extent you can say anything, would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, so I think in the near future, we're going to see most of the DeFi protocols within Avalanche either on C chain or building on their own subnet adopt BTC.b, and we've already really seen it in terms of GMX and Dex a lot and other DeFi applications. And so personally, I think BTC.b will in time become the dominant version of Bitcoin within the Avalanche ecosystem. If it's not already, I'll have to check in real time right now and see if it's crossed the inflection point. But in terms of kind of a native messaging solution or bridging solution, I'll hand that over to Michelle and kind of give you a teaser.
Sure. Yeah, we're actively working right now on cross subnet communication. So that is something that we're definitely really excited about. no timelines per se yet, but it is something I think will be coming up soon. And I think that will be really cool because in the future, maybe Chainlink feeds won't necessarily have to be on every subnet. Instead, the subnets will be able to query, other subnets or the C chain where the Chainlink feeds currently reside in. So I think that is definitely really cool. Just arbitrary data message passing, which is essentially the ability to send any type of message from one subnet to another. I think that opens the door up for various things like Chainlink Oracle and various other items.
Awesome. Well, last thing, where can people stay up to date with the Avalanche chain, the bridge team developments? I mentioned Michael's blog post, which I believe is on Medium, but there's a lot of other great content. Where can someone stay up to date on everything new with Avalanche?
Yeah, so Medium's a great place to start, but as well as following the YouTube channel, following the Reddit, being involved on Discord, the official Telegram, and then my personal favorite is following basically the whole Ava Labs team on Twitter. It's probably the most up-to-date information and kind of the quickest way to get it. And so maybe we can provide a kind of a helpful list of people to follow on Twitter as well.
That'd be great. Michelle and Matt, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for explaining BTC.b in more detail and the work we've done with Proof of Reserve. There'll be a list of links below, and thank everyone for watching today.